she choked, furious at herself for collapsing back into the grief of her own death again. She scrubbed at her eyes and cursed herself before taking a deep breath and forcing herself to calm back down. Even after touching words, she felt at a loss. Do they not understand? You were the best friends a girl could have. Sweetie Belle is more of an angel than I am. And Apple Bloom is just trying to be strong for her. It isn't fair. The crowd slowly dispersed as hours ticked by. Scootaloo watched many of the adults she had known spoke in low, soft tones of their regret and sorrow. She watched as some lay down gifts and letters to a filly that most of them had never known. Was it guilt that drove him to do this? She didn't know. She only watched as familiar and unfamiliar alike gathered to say their goodbyes, and then she was all alone. Scootaloo could feel a dull ache in her chest as she sat there waiting. Out of many faces, there had been one missing. I guess I wasn't really important to her. She began looking up at the mare who moved to sit beside her, offering only what she had to give, if only an ear to listen. Scootaloo continued as she looked up at the sky. I wanted to grow up to be just like her. She was the most amazing flyer in all of Equestria. She could break the sound barrier. She could move the world if she wanted to, but she didn't. A creak of protest interrupted her. The origin came from a rusted hinge at the funeral's gate, and two figures seemed to move at the edge of the haze that had begun to enshroud the gravesite. They seemed to speak to each other for a few minutes. One turned away only to be shoved by the other, gently but firm in its resolution. As one ushered her companion near, their voices began to materialize. I can't. Oh, Celestia, please. I can't do this. Yes, you can. I know this is hard, and it's going to be hard for a little while longer. But if you don't do this, then you'll never get another chance. Please. The silhouettes began to come clearer outlines, and Scootaloo's eyes widened as, finally, they stepped into visibility and approached the coffin. Hey, kiddo, it's me. Oh, Scootaloo, I'm so sorry. The mare choked, a cry of anguish ripping itself from her heaving chest. Tears blinded her as she bowed her head and rested against the coffin. I'm so sorry. If I had known, I should have. I'm so stupid, Scoots. I should have seen what was going on. You were the first filly to believe in me. You looked up to me. You depended on me, and I was so blind. It should have been me. She cried, beating the earth below her with her front hoof. It should have been me. I'm so sorry. I loved you, Scootaloo, and I never told you that. It didn't have to be this way, and it's my fault. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, Scootaloo. It was then Fluttershy tucked her wing around her friend and held her close. It was disturbing in its way. Scootaloo could find no words for what she saw before her. The strongest flyer in Equestria now bowed before her, broken and inconsolable by even her closest friend. She had never seen Rainbow cry before. She had never even known if the confident mare was capable of allowing herself that relief. That didn't matter to her anymore. Scootaloo had mattered. Now it was too late. Yet, at the same time, Scootaloo couldn't bring herself to anger. She had been angry at times, yes. Why had no one ever looked for her? Why had her parents failed to take care of her? Why had Rainbow never once asked if everything was okay with her home life? Or known there had never been a home for her to go back to? In life, those things had made her angry. Now they only made a deep sigh well within her, as she wished she could tell Rainbow her true feelings. She had never blamed any of them for what had happened, and she never would. They never needed to ask for forgiveness, because they were never blamed. But how could they know? How could they hear a voice come from a mouth that would never move again. Fluttershy did her best to console Rainbow for the time that passed so slowly. Finally, after a moment in eternity that lasted for what seemed forever, Rainbow got up. The mare silently pulled out something she had tucked beneath her wings, placing it on the coffin and whispering a final goodbye before turning to leave with Fluttershy at her side. Once they had gone, Scootaloo brought herself to look at it. It wasn't a second longer before she couldn't look at it anymore and turned away. The crown of Equestria's best young flyer had been placed over the cape Rarity had left behind. It had been Rainbow's pride and joy. It had been her happiness and inspiration. Now, it was only a memory that they would never share, and a broken dream. She would never get to see her fly, so there was no reason to wait for the next best flyer, her flyer, that had never gotten to soar. As they reached the gate to the funeral, Rainbow stopped one last time to cast a glance back at what could have been. She couldn't see Scootaloo staring back at her, nor could she see anything more of the tears that blinded her. Now, truly alone, the air was silent. The filly and the mare sat together there for a long time, the filly staring up into a nothingness that stretched endlessly before her. There were endless possibilities now to fill the void of all that she would never grow up to realize. The destination of heaven now loomed to replace the journey of life to reach it. There was no hurry to get there. She had all the time in the world now. The mare knew this just as well as she did, and did not move to disturb the filly's thoughts. Days passed in the course of those thoughts, and Scootaloo uttered not a word. She sat there, perfectly still, staring sadly into forever that merely stared back. Tears would occasionally brim and flow down her features, but even those waned and ended as time passed. Finally, on the first morning of winter, she spoke. "I've decided." The words came from absolute silence. The mare started at the sudden resolution. Is such a young filly's voice, but listened to what she had deemed worthy of heaven. Over thousands of years she had heard and seen many different heavens. Sometimes the heaven would be of one who chose to become a god and rule forever in their own domain. Sometimes a heaven would be a fantasy that they had never gotten to fulfill. Then sometimes it would simply be to never want or need for anything again, and to simply join their loved ones when their time came, living in paradise for all eternity. Scootaloo continued, pushing herself up and bracing for whatever was going to come next. "I know what I want, so now what?" While the mare found it odd, she did not simply speak it and let it be. She nodded and turned to stare into forever once more. "Will it to be? But be sure, there isn't any going back after this. Do you understand?" Scootaloo only nodded and closed her eyes. This was her heaven. This was her final wish. The world had felt like it had exploded around her. Suddenly, needles of ice punctured her lungs. The metallic taste of blood tinged her lips, and for some reason she was burning alive. In the distance she could hear sirens wailing and terse, anxious voices barking out orders and choppy directions. None of them made any sense, and she was being eaten from the inside out with fear. Scootaloo struggled even to remember what had happened that had led to this, but her thoughts were sluggish and she couldn't seem to collect them. Only once the world came to a shuddering halt did she realize that she was in an ambulance. Before she could invest in the thought, she felt herself slip from consciousness, and she was plunged into the complete darkness. It didn't last long, or didn't seem to. What felt like seconds later, she opened her eyes and tried to sit up with a start. Her entire body was convulsing and trembling, but She could feel the heartbeat raging away within her frail chest. A strong set of hooves pushed her gently back down, and she tossed her head wildly to see who was finding her. The will to fight disappeared. A rainbow dash, she managed, her teeth clattering so hard she quickly gave up on attempting more than that. The mare looked down at her with tears in her eyes, but was smiling despite being just as scared as the filly. Calm down, kiddo. Take it easy for me. That's right. That's my girl. A nurse entered the room, followed by other familiar faces. Scootaloo! Oh, Scoot, are you okay? Both of them were pulled away by their older sisters as the rest of the visitors filed in slowly. Apple Bloom, she's gotta rest now. Your friend had a pretty close call. For once, Rarity agreed, pulling Sweetie Belle close to her. I should say so. Why did you girls never tell us that she had been living in that tiny little clubhouse? Both of the fillies lowered their heads, guilt surging within their voices. We never knew. I never asked. As the nurse administered the vital warmth of a young Pegasus needed, trembling began to subside. Slowly, she found her voice and used it now to say the hardest thing she had ever brought herself to. It wasn't their fault. It's mine. I was ashamed. I was scared of being taken back to the orphanage if anything. So I lied to him. I was scared of saying goodbye. The room went quiet as it sunk in. She could see on each of their faces that they could not bring themselves to simply accept that answer. I should have known. I should have done something. Although unspoken, Scootaloo could see it in their faces. Only one of them spoke aloud, but it is not what she had expected to hear. I'm leaving. This is something I should have done a long time ago. Her eyes widened as she turned to face the voice of her mentor. Rainbow Dash, no, please. The sudden distress caused her breathing to hitch, and she was taken by a fit of coughing. Without being able to say another word, she could only watch as the pony she looked up to the most got up and left the room. The action had taken her, even her friends, aback, and Fluttershy rushed after her to see what was the meaning of the outburst. The others merely talked amongst themselves, frightened of further upsetting the delicate health of the filly. They took it gradually outside, leaving Scootaloo alone with the nurse. Even her closest friends had been dragged away to leave her. This had to be a nightmare. Nurse Redheart frowned, her eyes filled with a quiet sympathy. She tried to lift her patient's spirits as she continued to work on gradually reintroducing warmth back into her tiny body. I'm sure they're just misunderstanding you. Your friends are just outside discussing important things right now, but I'm sure they'll be back to visit once you're stable. The word caused Scootaloo to break from her sad reverie and realized that her body still felt as though it was overly warm. What happened? Nurse Redheart stopped and considered whether it was a wise idea to tell the filly of how close a call she had. Delicately, she tried to make it so she would understand. Sweetheart, they couldn't wake you up. After your friends went home, I think one of them got worried and said something to their sister about not having seen you outside that little clubhouse for some time. It was enough to call a search party, and about an hour ago, Rainbow Dash found you curled up on the floor. She couldn't wake you, so she flew for help. If she hadn't found you, you wouldn't be here right now. She then moved close and tucked in the thick blanket close around the tiny Pegasus's wings. They call it hypothermia. The temperature dropped so suddenly, and you were only wrapped in a thin blanket. You got too cold too quickly, and it's very dangerous. I can only honestly say that I'm grateful that you're alive and awake to be here right now. Scootaloo said nothing, but rolled over. It was so much to take in. It was so much to handle, and she was so exhausted. The nurse didn't disturb her anymore with the rest of the details, but the mare did lean down to gently kiss the top of her head. Get some sleep. Good night, Scootaloo. The nurse walked to the door and gave One looked back before turning off the lights and shutting it quietly, leaving the little filly to fall into fitful slumber. Morning brought it with a new world. Scootaloo slowly opened her eyes and took a deep breath, grateful her lungs had stopped burning. The room came into focus gradually, and she found herself staring at something foreign. Rainbow Dash had come in sometime during the night and fallen asleep. The mare was curled up on a small sofa in the corner of the room, surrounded by flowers and gifts her friend had asked her to bring. The morning light caused her to stir, and the soft growling drifted from her as she opened her wings and stretched. It was then she noticed Scootaloo watching, and she moved to the bedside. Good morning. Scootaloo lowered her gaze, and braced herself for the lecture she was sure was coming. Rainbow Dash had been woken up in the middle of the night to go look for her in the cold. She had had to deal with her stupidity at not knowing better, for not being more careful. She could hear her fears as loudly as if they had already been spoken, and dreaded the stark reality she had woken up to. The world was about to change. The words never came, though. Rainbow didn't launch into a long-winded lecture, or start yelling at the filly. I think I just dropped it up a little bit. She did not scream at her or at how stupid and useless she had been, nor how unloved she'd be shut away. Instead, a gentle hoof took her own, and Rainbow spoke quietly. I'm sorry about last night. I was angry at myself. I've done a lot of stupid things. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm going to try to start fixing them though, starting right now. Scootaloo. She gently took the filly's chin and made her look up at her. Rainbow smiled and took a deep breath before finishing what she had begun. How would you feel about moving in with me? About me adopting you? Last night made me think about a lot of things long and hard. I was so scared of losing you. We all were. So if you can forgive me for being so slow, you'd never have to be alone again. You can come home. It took a few seconds before it sank in, but the filly answered without words. Tears brimmed, hot and unbidden with joy, and as a relief sob broke from her and she hugged Rainbow as tight as she could. The mare didn't push her away. She would never push her away, and she would never wake up alone. This is the beginning of the rest of your life, kiddo. I promise to make it an adventure as long as I can. Through the tears, she opened her eyes. She could see Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle standing there, both of them just as overwhelmed as she was with emotion. Behind them, their sisters and the other mares stood, all relieved and thankful that the nightmare had ended. All of them were there, and for a moment someone she didn't recognize. It had been an old gray mare passing by with a smile on her face. She was there and gone, leaving the filly to the happy moment. Later that day, the adoption papers were signed and officiated. Scootaloo was released from the hospital a few days later, and she walked out with her new guardian by her side. An old gray mare watched from the hospital window. Sad brown eyes closed, and a tear slid down her cheek to meet her smile. The filly would never again see her, but she would remember her. She would be the one who chose all the pains and sorrows of life, so that every moment of happiness and joy was her own little piece of heaven that she would never have to wake up from again. Pre-order Battlefield 4 on the Xbox One. No, don't. Please, don't. If you want to pre-order it on Xbox 360. Please. I'm getting on the 360. And no, I will not give Ninja cookies. Never. Maybe a Blumpkin. But that's for Soren only. Damn, dude. Damn, dude. Damn, dude, Ultra Balls cost a lot. Okay, I think I'm done.